The rain hammered down on Dorothy Emerson's shoulders like 1,000 tiny fists as she stood shivering on the porch of the Grand Richardson house. Her carpetbag clutched against her soaked dress, realizing with mounting horror that the family had left town without a word and taken the only key with them. Trinity, Texas had never seen such a storm in the summer of 1878, at least not according to old Mrs. Patterson who ran the general store, and Dorothy had been foolish enough to trust the Richardson family when they promised steady work as a housemaid. She had traveled 3 weeks from St. Louis, spending nearly every cent she had saved, only to arrive and find the house dark and empty. A hastily scrawled note on the door saying they had departed for San Francisco due to a family emergency. The note was already dissolving in the rain, the ink running like tears down the weathered wood. Dorothy knocked again, hoping against hope that perhaps someone remained inside, a housekeeper or a stable hand, anyone who might offer shelter from the deluge. Her knuckles were raw and red from the cold, her dark hair plastered to her face, and her good traveling dress was ruined beyond repair. At 22 years old, she had thought herself capable and prepared for whatever challenges the frontier might present. But she had not counted on betrayal before she even began. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the muddy street of Trinity's main thoroughfare, and Dorothy made a decision. She could not stand here all night, waiting for a door that would never open. Gathering what remained of her dignity, she stepped off the porch and began walking, though she had no idea where she was going. The town was small, perhaps 24 buildings clustered together against the vast Texas prairie, and most windows were already dark for the night. Rain poured from the brim of her ruined bonnet, and her boots squelched with every step. She passed the saloon, its warm light spilling onto the street along with raucous laughter and piano music. A group of cowboys stumbled out, and Dorothy quickly crossed to the other side, keeping her head down. She knew better than to linger near such establishments, especially alone and vulnerable as she was. Her mama had warned her about men who might take advantage, and Dorothy had always been careful, always proper. But proper did not keep a person dry or fed. The boarding house was her next thought, but when she finally located it at the far end of town, she found it completely dark, and no amount of knocking roused anyone inside. Dorothy felt tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks, hot and desperate. She had been so certain this position would be her salvation. Her chance to build a new life after her father's death had left her family destitute. Her mother and younger sisters were depending on the money she would send, and now she had nothing. A flash of lightning revealed a small cabin set back from the main street, smoke rising from its chimney despite the rain. It was modest, built of rough-hewn logs with a covered porch, and a light glowed in the window. Dorothy hesitated, propriety warring with survival, but another crack of thunder decided for her. She hurried toward the cabin, her legs trembling with cold and exhaustion. She knocked softly at first, then louder when no one answered. Inside, she could hear movement. The scrape of a chair, heavy footsteps. The door swung open, and Dorothy found herself looking up at a tall man with rain-dampened dark hair and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He was perhaps 25 or 26, broad-shouldered and lean, in the way of men who worked hard for their living, wearing a simple cotton shirt and worn denim pants. A gun belt hung on a peg behind him, and his hands were calloused but clean. "Please," Dorothy said, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I am sorry to disturb you, but I have nowhere else to go. The family I was to work for has left town, and I have been locked out in the rain. I do not mean to impose, but if you could spare even a corner of your porch until morning, I would be most grateful." The man stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable, and Dorothy felt her heart sink. She was preparing to apologize and leave when he stepped aside, holding the door open wider. "Get in here before you catch your death," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried the cadence of Texas born and raised. No one should be out in this weather. Dorothy did not need to be told twice. She stumbled inside, dripping water onto the clean wooden floor, and immediately felt guilty for the mess she was making. The cabin was small but well kept, a single room with a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, a stove with a fire burning cheerfully, and shelves lined with supplies. It smelled of coffee and wood smoke and something else, something indefinably masculine that made Dorothy acutely aware she was alone with a strange man. "I am sorry about the floor," she said, setting down her sodden carpetbag. "I will clean it up, I promise, and I will leave as soon as the rain stops." I do not wish to be a burden." The man closed the door against the wind and studied her with those remarkable green eyes. "You are shaking like a leaf. Sit down by the stove before you collapse." He pulled out one of the chairs, and Dorothy sank into it gratefully, her legs giving out beneath her. Now that she was inside, the full extent of her exhaustion hit her like a physical blow. She had been traveling for days, sleeping poorly in uncomfortable stagecoaches and cheap hotels, and the shock of finding herself stranded had drained what little energy she had left. The man moved around the cabin with efficient grace, pulling a blanket from his bed and draping it over her shoulders, then pouring hot coffee into a tin cup and pressing it into her hands. Dorothy wrapped her fingers around the warmth, feeling sensation slowly return to her numb digits. "Thank you," she whispered. "You are very kind." He grunted, a sound that might have been acknowledgement or dismissal, and returned to the stove where a pot of something savory was simmering. "You said you were supposed to work for a family, the Richardsons?" "Yes. How did you know?" "Only family in Trinity wealthy enough to hire help from back east. I heard they lit out 3 days ago. Emergency with Mrs. Richardson's mother in California." He ladled stew into a bowl and set it on the table before her. "Eat." Dorothy wanted to protest, to insist she could not take his food, but the smell made her stomach clench with hunger, and she found herself picking up the spoon. The stew was simple but delicious, beef and potatoes and carrots in a rich broth, and she ate slowly, trying to maintain some semblance of manners despite her desperation. "I am Dorothy Emerson," she said between bites. "From St. Louis originally." The man leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his chest, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "Vincent Vale. I work the cattle ranch about 5 miles north of here. This is just my place in town for when I need supplies or the weather turns bad." "It is a nice cabin," Dorothy offered, looking around with genuine appreciation. Everything was neat and orderly, not what she would have expected from a bachelor cowboy. Books were stacked on a small shelf near the bed, and she could see titles about ranching and animal husbandry, but also a volume of Shakespeare and what looked like poetry. Vincent followed her gaze, and something that might have been embarrassment crossed his face. "I like to read when I have time, taught myself mostly. My mother insisted I learn my letters before she died, said no son of hers would be ignorant." There was something in his voice when he mentioned his mother, a softness that made Dorothy warm to him despite her natural caution. She finished the stew and set down the spoon, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I do not know what I am going to do," she admitted, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "I spent almost everything I had getting here. I have perhaps $2 to my name, and my family is counting on me to send money. I was supposed to earn $8 a month plus room and board. Now, I have nothing." Vincent was quiet for a moment, his green eyes thoughtful. "The boarding house will have a room tomorrow. Mrs. Fletcher, who runs it, goes to bed early, but she will be up at dawn. It is not expensive, maybe $3 a week with meals." "But I do not have $3 to spare," Dorothy said, trying not to let despair overwhelm her. "And even if I did, I need work. Is there anything in Trinity? Any families who might need help?" "Not much call for housemaids in a town this size. Most women do their own work. There is the saloon, but I would not recommend that for a woman like you." Vincent pushed away from the wall and moved to look out the window at the rain. "The school teacher just quit, ran off with a traveling salesman. Town council has been looking for a replacement. You educated?" Dorothy sat up straighter, hope flickering to life in her chest. "Yes. My father was a minister, and he insisted all his children learn to read and write and cipher. I have read extensively, and I help teach Sunday school back home. Pay would not be much, maybe $10 a month, but it comes with a small house behind the church. You would have to convince the council you are qualified." Vincent turned back to face her, and something in his expression had shifted, become almost protective. "I could speak for you if you like. My word carries some weight around here." "You would do that for me? But you do not even know me." Dorothy felt tears threatening again, but this time from gratitude rather than despair. Vincent shrugged, looking uncomfortable with her emotion. "You seem like a decent woman in a bad situation. No reason not to help if I can. Besides, the children in Trinity need a proper teacher. Last one could barely read herself." Dorothy stood, still wrapped in the blanket, and crossed to where he stood. She was tall for a woman, but he still had several inches on her, and she had to look up to meet his eyes. "I do not know how to thank you properly, Mr. Vale. "You have been extraordinarily kind." "Vincent," he said quietly. "Just Vincent, and you can thank me by getting some rest. You look dead on your feet." The reality of the situation suddenly struck Dorothy. She was alone in a cabin with a man she had just met, with night fully fallen and the storm showing no signs of abating. Heat rose to her cheeks despite the chill that still clung to her bones. Vincent seemed to read her thoughts. "I will sleep on the floor. You take the bed. And before you protest, I have slept in worse places. A bedroll on a wooden floor is luxury compared to the ground during a cattle drive." "I cannot take your bed," Dorothy protested weakly. "You can, and you will. Your dress needs to dry, and you need proper sleep. I will turn my back while you change into something dry. You have anything in that bag that is not soaked through?" Dorothy opened her carpet bag with trembling fingers and was relieved to find that her nightdress, tucked in the center wrapped in paper, was only slightly damp. She pulled it out along with a shawl. Vincent had already turned to face the wall, and Dorothy quickly stripped off her wet things, hanging them on pegs near the stove to dry. Her undergarments were soaked as well, and she hesitated before removing them, but practicality won over modesty. She could not sleep in wet clothes. The nightdress was plain white cotton, high-necked and long-sleeved, entirely proper, but she still felt exposed as she climbed into Vincent's bed, pulling the quilt up to her chin. "I am decent," she said softly. Vincent turned and began pulling blankets from a chest, making himself a pallet on the floor near the stove. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own space, and Dorothy found herself watching him, noting the way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the strong line of his jaw, the gentle way he handled even simple objects. "Vincent," she said into the quiet, the rain drumming steadily on the roof above them. "Why did you help me? Really? You could have turned me away." He was silent for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "My mother was in a similar situation once. Pregnant with me, no husband, family turned her out. She nearly died in a snowstorm before a rancher and his wife took her in. They gave her work and a place to stay, treated her with respect even though most of the town looked down on her. She never forgot that kindness, and she taught me to pass it along when I could." Dorothy felt her throat tighten with emotion. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." "She was. Died when I was 15. Fever took her fast." Vincent settled onto his pallet, pulling a blanket over himself. "Try to sleep, Dorothy. Tomorrow we will sort things out." The use of her first name sent a strange flutter through her stomach, but she was too exhausted to examine the feeling closely. The bed was comfortable, the quilts warm and smelling of cedar and sunshine, and despite the strangeness of her situation, Dorothy felt safe for the first time since leaving St. Louis. She drifted off to the sound of rain and Vincent's steady breathing and dreamed of green eyes and gentle hands. Morning arrived with bright sunshine and the smell of coffee. Dorothy woke slowly, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, then remembered everything in a rush. She sat up quickly, clutching the quilt, and found Vincent already up and dressed, frying eggs and bacon on the stove. "Good morning," he said without turning around. "Your clothes are mostly dry. I will step outside while you dress." He carried his coffee out onto the porch, closing the door behind him, and Dorothy scrambled out of bed. Her dress was indeed dry, though wrinkled and stained from the rain. She dressed quickly, braiding her long, dark hair and pinning it up as best she could without a proper mirror. When she opened the door, Vincent came back inside and handed her a plate of food. They ate in companionable silence, and Dorothy marveled at how comfortable she felt with this near stranger. There was something solid and dependable about Vincent Vale, something that made her trust him, despite her mama's warnings about cowboys and frontier men. "The town council meets this afternoon," Vincent said, mopping up egg yolk with a piece of bread. "I will take you to the boarding house first, convince Mrs. Fletcher to give you credit for a few days until we can get you sorted with the teaching position. If the council approves you, you will have your salary and the schoolhouse to live in. If they do not, we will figure something else out." "We?" Dorothy asked softly. Vincent met her eyes, and something passed between them, a recognition of connection that neither could quite name. "I am not going to leave you stranded, Dorothy, not after getting you this far." Mrs. Fletcher turned out to be a round, cheerful woman in her 50s, who took one look at Dorothy's bedraggled appearance and Vincent's earnest face, and immediately offered a room with breakfast and supper included. Vincent paid for 3 days up front before Dorothy could protest. waving away her stammered thanks with gruff embarrassment. "Pay me back when you get your first salary," he said firmly. "Now get yourself cleaned up proper. I will come by at 2 o'clock to take you to the meeting." Dorothy spent the next hours making herself as presentable as possible. Mrs. Fletcher kindly offered the use of her iron and helped Dorothy press her dress until it looked nearly respectable. Another boarder, a young woman named Sarah who worked at the general store, lent Dorothy a clean white collar to freshen up her appearance. When Vincent arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, Dorothy barely recognized him. He had changed into clean clothes, a pressed white shirt and black vest, his hair still damp from washing, his jaw freshly shaved. He looked every inch a respectable rancher, and when his eyes widened slightly at the sight of her, Dorothy felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. "You look very nice," he said, offering his arm. "As do you," Dorothy replied, taking his arm and trying to ignore how solid and warm it felt beneath her fingers. The town council met in a back room of the general store and consisted of 5 men: the store owner, Mr. Patterson, the banker, Mr. Thornton, the blacksmith, Mr. Murphy, the saloon owner, Mr. Kelly, and the preacher, Reverend Hutchins. They sat behind a long table, looking important and slightly uncomfortable in their Sunday best, despite it being a Thursday. Vincent made the introductions, and Dorothy stood straight and tall, meeting each man's eye in turn, as her father had taught her. When they began asking questions about her education and experience, she answered clearly and confidently, citing the books she had read, the children she had taught, her understanding of arithmetic and grammar and history. "What about discipline?" Mr. Murphy asked, his thick arms crossed over his barrel chest. "Some of those older boys can be right troublemakers. You think you can handle them?" "I believe children respond to respect and clear expectations," Dorothy said firmly. "I will not tolerate disruption in my classroom, but neither will I resort to excessive harshness. Education should be a joy, not a punishment." Reverend Hutchins nodded approvingly. "Well said, Miss Emerson. And your father was a minister, you say? What denomination?" "Presbyterian, Reverend. He believed deeply in education for all people, regardless of circumstance. He often said that ignorance was the devil's playground." That earned a few chuckles, and Dorothy felt the atmosphere in the room warming toward her. They asked more questions about her plans for the curriculum, her thoughts on teaching children of different ages in one room, her willingness to organize community events like spelling bees and recitations. Finally, Mr. Patterson called for a vote, and one by one, the council members raised their hands in approval. Dorothy felt dizzy with relief and had to concentrate on maintaining her composure. "Congratulations, Miss Emerson," Reverend Hutchins said, coming around the table to shake her hand. "School starts in 2 weeks, first Monday of September. That will give you time to settle in and prepare. I will show you the schoolhouse tomorrow morning." Vincent walked her back to the boarding house, and Dorothy could not stop smiling despite her best efforts at maintaining dignity. "I cannot believe it. I have a position, a home, everything I needed, and it is all because of you, Vincent." "You got the job on your own merits," Vincent said, but he was smiling too, a rare expression that transformed his usually serious face. "I just made the introduction." They had reached the boarding house, but neither moved to part ways. The afternoon sun was warm on Dorothy's face, and she found herself reluctant to say goodbye, even knowing she would see him again soon. "Will you call on me?" she asked, then immediately felt mortified by her forwardness. "I mean, I would like to thank you properly. Perhaps you could take supper here tomorrow evening? I will pay, of course, to begin repaying my debt to you." Vincent's smile widened. "I would like that. But you do not owe me anything, Dorothy. I was happy to help." He tipped his hat and turned to leave, and Dorothy watched him walk away, noting the easy way he moved, the nods of respect he received from people on the street. Vincent Vale was clearly a well-regarded man in Trinity, and she felt fortunate beyond measure that he had been the one to answer his door last night. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Reverend Hutchins showed Dorothy the schoolhouse, a simple building with benches and desks for about 20 students, a chalkboard, and a surprising number of books donated by various families over the years. The small house behind it was even more modest than Vincent's cabin, just 2 rooms with a cook stove, a bed, a table, and a rocking chair. But it was clean and sturdy and entirely hers. Dorothy threw herself into preparation, organizing the books by subject and difficulty, planning lessons, making lists of supplies she would need. The town rallied around their new teacher, with families stopping by to introduce themselves and their children, offering everything from fresh eggs to furniture to help make the little house more comfortable. And Vincent came by nearly every day. At first he brought practical things: firewood, a lamp that burned brighter than her old one, a thick rug for the floor. Then his offerings became more personal: a jar of wildflower honey because he remembered she took her tea sweet, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, a rocking chair he built himself when he noticed her old one wobbled. They took walks in the evening when the Texas heat had cooled to something bearable, strolling along the creek that ran behind the town. Dorothy learned that Vincent had been born in Trinity, that his father had been a gambler who left before he was born, that he had worked on the Broken Arrow Ranch since he was 16, and had saved enough to buy his own small spread of land 2 years ago. "Not much yet," he admitted, as they sat on a fallen log watching the water flow past. "Just 200 acres and about 50 head of cattle. But it is mine, and I am building it up slowly. In another 5 years, I hope to have a real ranch house built, something permanent." "I think that is wonderful," Dorothy said sincerely. "Building something of your own, creating a legacy, that takes courage and determination." Vincent glanced at her, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. "What about you, Dorothy? What do you want for your future?" She considered the question carefully. "I want to make a difference. I want my students to have opportunities I never had, to see beyond Trinity, and know they can achieve whatever they dream. And someday—" She paused, feeling vulnerable. "Someday I would like a family of my own, children to love, and a home to make beautiful." "That does not sound like too much to ask," Vincent said quietly. His hand moved slightly on the log between them, and Dorothy felt the warmth of his fingers brushing against hers. Neither of them pulled away. When school began, Dorothy threw herself into teaching with passionate dedication. She had 18 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old, and while some were more enthusiastic than others, none were truly difficult. She made learning as engaging as possible, incorporating games and competitions, reading stories with dramatic flair, taking the children outside for nature lessons when the weather permitted. The town quickly came to appreciate their new teacher. Parents remarked on how excited their children were to attend school, how much they were learning, how Miss Emerson seemed to genuinely care about each student as an individual. And through it all, Vincent remained a constant presence in Dorothy's life. He helped repair a broken window in the schoolhouse, brought his horse to give the children a lesson in proper animal care, attended the spelling bee she organized, and cheered louder than anyone when young Tommy Patterson won. People began to talk, naturally. In a town the size of Trinity, a single man and single woman spending so much time together could not help but attract notice. Mrs. Fletcher teased Dorothy gently about her cowboy beau, and Sarah confided that all the unmarried women in town were jealous. Dorothy tried to tell herself they were simply friends, that Vincent was being kind as he had been from the start. But she could not ignore the way her pulse quickened when she saw him, the way she found herself looking for excuses to touch his arm or stand close to him, the way she dreamed about him at night with an intensity that sometimes shocked her. It was late October when everything changed. The weather had turned cooler, a relief after the brutal Texas summer, and Dorothy had been teaching for nearly 2 months. She was walking home from the general store, her arms full of supplies for the next week's lessons, when a group of cowboys rode into town, clearly drunk and looking for trouble. Dorothy tried to hurry past, but one of them caught sight of her and made a crude comment about the pretty schoolteacher. His companions laughed, and they began following her, calling out suggestions that made Dorothy's face burn with shame and anger. "Leave her alone." The voice was cold and hard, nothing like Vincent's usual warm drawl. Dorothy turned to see him standing in the middle of the street, his hand resting casually on his gun belt, his green eyes like ice. The cowboys pulled up their horses, suddenly wary. The one who had spoken first, a large man with a scar across his cheek, sneered down at Vincent. "This your woman, Vale? Looks like she needs someone to teach her to be more friendly. She is a lady, and you will treat her with respect, or you will answer to me." Vincent's voice was utterly calm, but there was steel underneath that made even the drunk cowboys hesitate. Dorothy held her breath, terrified that violence would erupt, but after a long, tense moment, the scarred man spat into the dirt and pulled his horse around. "Not worth the trouble. Come on, boys, let us get a drink." They rode off toward the saloon, and Vincent remained still until they were out of sight. Then he crossed to Dorothy, his face transforming from cold fury to concern. "Are you all right? Did they touch you?" "I am fine," Dorothy said, though her hands were shaking. "Thank you for intervening. I do not know what they might have done if you had not been there." Vincent took the supplies from her arms, his jaw tight. "I am walking you home. And Dorothy, I think we need to talk." Her heart pounded as they made their way to the schoolhouse, but Vincent said nothing until they were inside with the door closed behind them. He set the supplies on the table and turned to face her, and Dorothy saw something in his expression she had never seen before, something vulnerable and fierce all at once. "I cannot do this anymore," he said roughly. "I cannot pretend that I am just being friendly or helpful. The truth is, I have been falling in love with you since the night you showed up on my doorstep, looking like a drowned kitten and too proud to beg. I think about you all the time, Dorothy. When I wake up, when I am working, when I am trying to sleep, you are always there in my thoughts." Dorothy felt as though all the air had been sucked from the room. She stared at him, unable to form words, her mind spinning. Vincent took her silence for rejection and looked away, his shoulders slumping. "I am sorry. I should not have said anything. I know I am just a cowboy with more ambition than sense, and you are educated and refined and could do so much better than someone like me. I will leave you alone if that is what you want. But I needed you to know the truth." "Vincent, stop." Dorothy found her voice at last and crossed to him, placing her hands on his chest to make him look at her. "You foolish, wonderful man. Do you really think I spend every evening walking with you, every Sunday after church sitting with you, every spare moment looking for your face because I see you as just a friend?" His eyes widened, hope dawning in them like sunrise. "Dorothy?" "I love you," she said, the words spilling out in a rush. "I have been trying not to, trying to be sensible and proper, but I cannot help it. You are the best man I have ever known. Vincent Vale, kind and strong and gentle and brave. The fact that you are a cowboy rather than a banker or a shopkeeper only makes me love you more. You have built yourself up from nothing through honest work and determination. How could I not admire that? How could I not love you?" Vincent's hands came up to cup her face, his calloused thumbs brushing across her cheekbones with aching tenderness. "Say it again." "I love you." Dorothy smiled through sudden tears. "I love you, I love you, I love you." He kissed her then, and Dorothy melted into it, her first real kiss, passionate and sweet and everything she had dreamed. Vincent's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she felt safe and cherished and utterly right in a way she had never experienced before. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Dorothy. I know it is fast, and I do not have much to offer yet, but I swear I will spend every day of my life making you happy. I will build us a home and work myself to the bone to give you everything you deserve. Just say you will be my wife." "Yes." Dorothy laughed, the sound giddy and joyful. "Yes, of course I will marry you. I do not care about grand houses or wealth, Vincent. I just want you. I want a life with you, whatever that looks like." He kissed her again, longer this time, and Dorothy forgot to be proper or cautious or anything except utterly, completely in love. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with half the town in attendance. Dorothy wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Fletcher, cream-colored wool with lace at the collar and cuffs, and carried a bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers that Vincent had picked himself that morning. He wore his best suit, looking handsome and nervous as he waited at the altar, and when Dorothy walked down the aisle on Reverend Hutchins' arm, his face broke into a smile that made her eyes sting with happy tears. The vows were traditional, promising to love and honor and cherish, but when Vincent slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Dorothy felt the weight of the commitment settle over her like a blessing. She was no longer alone, no longer uncertain about her future. She was Dorothy Vale now, wife to the best man she had ever known. The town threw them a celebration at the church hall, with food and music and dancing. Vincent, it turned out, was an excellent dancer, leading Dorothy through reels and waltzes with surprising grace for someone who worked with cattle for a living. "Where did you learn to dance?" she asked, breathless and laughing as he spun her. "My mother taught me," Vincent said, smiling down at her. She said that any man who wanted to court a good woman needed to know how to dance properly. I think she would have liked you, Dorothy. I think she would have been so happy I found you. I wish I could have met her, Dorothy said softly, but I will honor her memory by loving her son with everything I have. They spent their wedding night in Vincent's cabin in town, the same place where they had first met. Someone had decorated it with candles and flowers, and a bottle of wine sat on the table with a note from Mrs. Fletcher wishing them joy. Vincent was gentle and patient with Dorothy's inexperience, and if there was some awkwardness as they learned each other's bodies, there was also laughter and tenderness and a passion that left them both trembling. Afterward, Dorothy lay in Vincent's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. I cannot believe this is real sometimes. 6 months ago, I was alone and frightened and certain my life was over. Now I am married to you, with meaningful work and a place I belong. It seems impossible. Vincent's arms tightened around her. You were locked out in the rain, and I opened my door. Turns out I opened my heart too, though I did not realize it at first. Best decision I ever made, Dorothy Vale. She tilted her head up to kiss him, slow and sweet. The best decision I ever made was knocking on your door. The next months were a period of adjustment and deepening love. Dorothy continued teaching, and Vincent continued working his ranch, but they spent every evening together, alternating between the schoolhouse and rides out to Vincent's land. He showed her every corner of his property, pointing out where he planned to build the ranch house, where the best grazing was, where a spring-fed pond would be perfect for swimming in summer. I want to make this into something our children will be proud of, Vincent said one crisp December evening as they stood looking out over his land. Something that will last, that we can pass down to them. Dorothy leaned against his side, warm in the coat he had bought her. How many children are we planning to have? As many as you want. Vincent looked down at her, his eyes tender. Though I hope for at least 2 or 3. I always hated being an only child. I think 3 or 4 sounds perfect, Dorothy said. Though let us take it one at a time. Vincent laughed and pulled her closer. We have time, my love, all the time in the world. Winter passed into spring, and Dorothy discovered she was pregnant in late March. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when Dr. Morrison confirmed it, she felt a mixture of joy and terror that left her dizzy. She was going to be a mother. She and Vincent were going to have a baby. She told him that evening, after he came home from the ranch, dusty and tired and smiling at the sight of her. Dorothy took his hands and placed them on her still flat belly, watching his face as understanding dawned. We are going to have a baby, she whispered. You are going to be a father, Vincent. For a moment, he just stared at her, his green eyes wide with wonder. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably woke half the town, lifting Dorothy off her feet and spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop before she got dizzy. I love you, he said, setting her down carefully and kissing her with fierce tenderness. I love you so much, Dorothy. Thank you. Thank you for this gift. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Dorothy had to stop teaching in late May when her condition became obvious. The town council assured her the position would be waiting when she was ready to return, and Sarah Patterson, the general store owner's daughter, who had just finished her own education back east, agreed to take over temporarily. Vincent became almost comically protective, refusing to let Dorothy lift anything heavy, insisting she rest at the slightest sign of fatigue, hovering until she had to shoo him away with exasperated affection. But she loved seeing this side of him, the way his hand constantly sought her swelling belly, the way he talked to their unborn child about the ranch and the horses, and how much he was looking forward to meeting them. What if I am not a good father? He asked one night as they lay in bed, his hand spread across her stomach. What if I do not know how to be what our child needs? Dorothy covered his hand with hers. You will be a wonderful father, Vincent. You are kind and patient and loving. Our child will be so lucky to have you. I never had a father, Vincent said quietly. I do not want to fail at this. You will not fail, and you will not be doing this alone. We are partners, remember? We will figure it out together. Their son was born on a sweltering August afternoon, after 12 hours of labor that left Dorothy exhausted but exhilarated. Dr. Morrison placed the squalling, red-faced baby in her arms, and Dorothy felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would probably turn green like his father's. Vincent, who had been pacing outside and driving everyone mad with worry, burst into the room the moment he was allowed. He stopped short at the sight of Dorothy holding their son, tears streaming down his face unashamedly. "Come meet your son," Dorothy said softly, and Vincent approached as if walking on sacred ground. He took the baby carefully, cradling him with surprising confidence for someone who claimed to know nothing about infants. "Hello there," he whispered. "Hello, little one. I am your papa. I have been waiting so long to meet you." The baby stopped crying, seeming to recognize his father's voice, and Dorothy felt tears of her own spill over. This was her family. This was everything she had dreamed of, and more. They named him William Vincent Vale, after no one in particular, just because they both liked the sound of it. He was a good baby, sleeping reasonably well and eating with enthusiasm, and Dorothy marveled every day at the miracle of him. Vincent proved to be a devoted father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with William when he fussed, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always soothed their son. Dorothy often found them together, Vincent talking to William about the ranch or reading to him from whatever book was handy, even though the baby was far too young to understand. When William was 6 months old, Vincent announced that he had saved enough to begin building their ranch house. Dorothy knew he had been working himself nearly to exhaustion, taking extra jobs and selling more cattle than originally planned, all to make his dream of a proper home a reality. "I want you and William to have something solid," he explained. "Not that there is anything wrong with the schoolhouse, but I want us to have a place that is truly ours, room for William to grow and for the brothers and sisters he will have someday." Construction began in the spring of 1880, and Dorothy watched with amazement as the house took shape. It was not a grand mansion, but it was substantial, 2 stories with 4 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a parlor, and a dining room. Vincent had designed it himself, incorporating everything Dorothy had mentioned wanting: large windows for light, a porch where they could sit in the evenings, a room specifically for books that could serve as her study. They moved in that summer, and Dorothy spent happy weeks making the house into a home, hanging curtains she had sewn herself, arranging furniture, creating spaces that felt warm and welcoming. William, now a year old and starting to toddle around, loved exploring the new house, and Vincent built a fence around the yard to keep him safe. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Dorothy returned to teaching part-time, with Mrs. Fletcher happily caring for William a few hours each day. Vincent's ranch continued to grow, and he hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, allowing him more time at home with his family. In the fall of 1881, Dorothy became pregnant again, and this time the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Helen Rose, was born in May of 1882, with the same dark hair as her brother and mother, but Vincent's distinctive green eyes. Vincent was utterly smitten, cradling his daughter with a tenderness that made Dorothy's heart ache. "She looks just like you," he murmured to Dorothy. "Beautiful and strong." William, now nearly 3, was fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything from feeding to diaper changes. Dorothy often found him sitting beside Helen's cradle, singing the same off-key lullabies Vincent sang, and she had to blink back tears at the sweetness of it. The years rolled on, marked by small joys and occasional challenges. A drought in 1883 tested Vincent's ranching skills, but he managed to keep his herd healthy through careful management, and the spring-fed pond he had always valued. Dorothy expanded the school curriculum to include more advanced subjects, and several of her students went on to attend universities back east, making her proud beyond words. In 1884, their 3rd child arrived, another son they named Thomas Edward. He was a surprise in many ways, arriving 3 weeks early, but healthy and loud. William and Helen adored their baby brother, and the house rang with the sounds of children laughing and playing. Dorothy sometimes thought back to that rain-soaked night when she had stood locked out and desperate, unable to imagine how she would survive. Now she had a husband who loved her devotedly, 3 beautiful children, meaningful work, and a place in a community that valued her. It seemed like something from a fairy tale, too good to be real, but it was real, proven every day in the way Vincent kissed her good morning, in William's improving reading skills, in Helen's delighted laughter, in baby Thomas's grip on her finger. This was her life, built from nothing but determination and the kindness of one good man who had opened his door and his heart. One evening in the fall of 1886, Dorothy sat on the porch watching the sun set over the prairie while Vincent sat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. The children were inside with Vincent's ranch hand, Joe, who was teaching them a card game. From inside came shrieks of laughter and protests about cheating. "Do you remember that night we met?" Dorothy asked, leaning into Vincent's warmth. "Every detail," Vincent said. "You standing there soaking wet, so proud and scared and trying not to show it. I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen. I remember thinking you had the kindest eyes." Dorothy smiled. "And I was right. You saved me that night, Vincent. Not just from the rain, but from despair. You gave me hope when I had none." "You saved me too," Vincent said quietly. "I did not even know how lonely I was until you walked into my life. This house, this ranch, none of it means anything without you and the children to share it with. You are my heart, Dorothy Vale, my entire heart." She turned to kiss him, still feeling the same flutter in her chest that she had felt during their first kiss all those years ago. Some things, it seemed, never faded. "Mama, Papa, Tommy won again, and William says he is cheating." Helen's voice rang out from inside, indignant and amused in equal measure. Dorothy and Vincent looked at each other and laughed. "Duty calls," Dorothy said. "Always does," Vincent agreed, but he was smiling as they stood and went inside to their children. The years continued their steady march, each one bringing new milestones and memories. William grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as his mother and showed a natural talent for working with horses like his father. Helen was bright and curious, always asking questions and wanting to understand how everything worked. Thomas was the wild one, fearless and mischievous, keeping Dorothy constantly on her toes. In 1889, Dorothy discovered she was pregnant again, a surprise given that Thomas was already 5, and she had assumed their family was complete. But this pregnancy felt different, more difficult, and Dr. Morrison insisted she rest as much as possible. Vincent was beside himself with worry, taking over all the household duties he could, and refusing to let Dorothy do anything he deemed too strenuous. The children, old enough now to understand their mother needed care, tried to help in their own ways, with William reading to her, Helen bringing her wildflowers, and Thomas cuddling quietly beside her instead of his usual rambunctious play. Their 4th child, another daughter they named Grace Eleanor, was born in early March of 1890, small but healthy. Dorothy's labor was longer and more difficult than the others, and afterward, Dr. Morrison quietly told them that she should not have any more children, that another pregnancy could be dangerous. Dorothy grieved the loss of possibility, having always imagined a large family, but Vincent simply held her and their new daughter close. "We have 4 beautiful, healthy children and each other. That is more than I ever dreamed of having, Dorothy. I am grateful for every blessing, and I will not risk losing you for anything." Grace proved to be a sweet, easy baby, and the older children doted on her. William, now 10 years old, was surprisingly gentle with his baby sister, while 8-year-old Helen loved helping care for her. Even Thomas, at 6, seemed to understand that Grace was precious and needed protection. Vincent's ranch had grown substantially over the years, now encompassing nearly 1,000 acres, with a herd of over 200 cattle. He had several ranch hands working for him, and the Broken Arrow brand was becoming known throughout Texas for quality beef. Despite their financial success, Vincent and Dorothy remained grounded, continuing to live modestly and giving generously to the community. Dorothy had stepped back from full-time teaching after Grace's birth, but she still tutored students privately and served on the school board, ensuring that Trinity continued to have quality education. Several of her former students had become teachers themselves, spreading her philosophy of education throughout the region. In the summer of 1893, tragedy struck the community when a fire swept through part of Trinity, destroying several buildings including the saloon, the boarding house, and the general store. The Pattersons lost everything, and Mrs. Fletcher, now in her 70s, was left homeless. Without hesitation, Vincent and Dorothy opened their home to Mrs. Fletcher, giving her a room on the 2nd floor and treating her like family. She proved to be a blessing, helping with the children and household tasks, bringing her own brand of cheerful wisdom to the family. "You two saved my life," Mrs. Fletcher said one evening, as they all sat around the dinner table. Just like Vincent saved yours that rainy night, Dorothy. Kindness has a way of coming full circle. William, now 13 and thoughtful beyond his years, said, "Papa always says that helping others is not about expecting anything in return. It is just the right thing to do." Vincent caught Dorothy's eye across the table, and they shared a smile. Their children were growing into good people, kind and compassionate, and that was worth more than any amount of money or success. The turn of the century found the Vale family prosperous and content. William, at 17, had decided to attend university in Austin to study veterinary medicine, planning to return to Trinity and serve the ranching community. Helen, at 15, was teaching at the school alongside Dorothy, showing a natural gift for education. Thomas, at 13, worked alongside his father on the ranch, already proving himself an excellent cattleman. And Grace, now 9, was the creative one, always drawing or writing stories, her imagination boundless. Vincent and Dorothy, now in their 40s, had settled into a comfortable partnership that had only deepened with time. They still took walks in the evening when they could, still sat on the porch watching the sunset, still shared secrets and dreams like newlyweds. "Do you ever regret it?" Vincent asked one night as they lay in bed, Dorothy's head on his chest as it had been since their wedding night. "Staying in Trinity, marrying me instead of pursuing something grander?" Dorothy propped herself up on her elbow to look at him. "Vincent Vale, after all these years, how can you still ask me that? You are my grand adventure. This life we have built together is everything I ever wanted and more. I would not change a single thing." "Not even that first night, standing in the rain, locked out and alone?" Dorothy smiled. "Especially not that night. Because that was the night I found you. That was the night my real life began." Vincent pulled her down for a kiss, still capable of making her heart race after more than 15 years of marriage. "I love you, Dorothy. More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "That is my line," Dorothy protested, laughing. "You stole my romantic declaration." "I learned from the best," Vincent said, grinning. They settled back into comfortable silence, and Dorothy reflected on the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. From a desperate, rain-soaked maid, with nothing but her carpetbag and her determination, to a wife, mother, teacher, and pillar of the community. All because one good man had opened his door when she needed help. In 1905, William returned from university with his veterinary degree and a wife, a lovely young woman named Margaret, who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on Vale land, and William opened his practice in Trinity, quickly becoming the go-to veterinarian for all the surrounding ranches. Helen married a teacher from a neighboring town in 1906, a quiet young man named Robert who shared her passion for education. They took over the school together, continuing the legacy Dorothy had built. Thomas, who had never wanted anything but ranch life, expanded the family business, buying additional land and diversifying into horse breeding. His skill with horses became legendary throughout Texas, and people came from hundreds of miles away to buy Vale-trained mounts. Grace, true to her artistic nature, moved to San Antonio to study art in 1908, though she returned frequently to visit. Her paintings of the Texas landscape began selling in galleries, and she made a name for herself while maintaining strong ties to her family in Trinity. Vincent and Dorothy became grandparents multiple times over, as their children started families of their own. By 1910, they had 7 grandchildren, with more on the way. And the ranch house that had once seemed so spacious was often filled to bursting with family gatherings. "We should add on," Vincent suggested after one particularly crowded Christmas dinner. "Another wing for when everyone comes to visit." Dorothy laughed. "At this rate, we will need a hotel. But yes, I think that is a wonderful idea. This house should always be big enough for family." They added a large dining room and sitting area, along with several guest bedrooms, completing the expansion in 1911. The house became known as the heart of the Vale family, the place where everyone gathered for holidays, celebrations, and simple Sunday dinners. In 1915, Dorothy and Vincent celebrated their 34th wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, with seemingly half of Trinity in attendance, sharing stories about the couple who had become legends in their own time. People spoke of Vincent's generosity and hard work, Dorothy's dedication to education and community, and the love story that had started with a locked door and a rainstorm. "Tell us how you met," one of the grandchildren demanded, and Dorothy and Vincent looked at each other, smiling. "Well," Dorothy began, "it was a dark and stormy night in the summer of 1878. I was locked out in the rain, with nowhere to go and no one to help me. And your grandmother knocked on my door," Vincent continued, taking Dorothy's hand, "and I opened it, not knowing that I was letting in the woman who would change my life forever." "That is so romantic," their granddaughter sighed, and everyone laughed. But it was romantic, Dorothy thought, looking around at the family they had built, the community they had served, the legacy they were leaving. From that one act of kindness on a rainy night had grown all of this. Love and life and family, spreading out like ripples in a pond. In 1920, Vincent and Dorothy celebrated their 40th anniversary. Vincent was 62 now, his dark hair streaked with silver, his face weathered by years of sun and wind. Dorothy was 58, her dark hair mostly gray, laugh lines around her eyes. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people who had fallen in love all those years ago. The party was smaller this time, just immediate family. And afterward, Dorothy and Vincent took a walk along the creek, as they had done so many times over the decades. It was summer again, warm and green, cicadas singing in the trees. 40 years, Vincent said wonderingly. "It feels like both forever and no time at all." "I know exactly what you mean," Dorothy agreed. "Sometimes I still feel like that young woman standing in the rain, uncertain of what the future holds. And then I look at our life and realize how far we have come." They reached the fallen log where Vincent had first told Dorothy he loved her, still there after all these years, and they sat down carefully. "Do you remember this spot?" Vincent asked. "Every detail," Dorothy said. "You had brought me here to watch the creek, and you suddenly told me you could not pretend anymore, that you had been falling in love with me. I thought my heart would burst with joy." "Mine too," Vincent said softly. "Best moment of my life until I actually married you. And then every moment after just kept getting better." Dorothy leaned against his shoulder, comfortable and content. "We have been so blessed, Vincent. A good life, healthy children, grandchildren we adore, more happiness than I ever thought possible." "All because you knocked on my door," Vincent said. "All because you opened it," Dorothy countered. They sat in companionable silence, holding hands, watching the water flow past just as they had 40 years ago. The creek had not changed much, but they had, growing and evolving together, building a life that neither could have imagined in those early days. "Promise me something," Vincent said suddenly. "Anything. Promise me that no matter what happens, you will always remember how much I love you, how grateful I am for every single day we have had together." Dorothy felt tears sting her eyes. They were getting older, both of them, and the reality of mortality was beginning to make itself known. "I promise, and you must promise the same. You are my heart, Vincent Vale. You always have been. Always will be," Vincent said, pulling her close. They remained at the creek until the sun began to set, painting the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, then walked slowly back to their home, surrounded by the evidence of their life together. In the years that followed, they slowed down but never stopped. Dorothy finally retired from teaching in 1922, though she continued to read voraciously and share her knowledge with anyone who asked. Vincent handed over daily ranch operations to Thomas in 1923, but still spent every day riding out to check on his land and cattle. Their love remained constant, a steady flame that had warmed them through 4 decades and showed no signs of diminishing. They took care of each other, as age brought its inevitable challenges, patient and tender. Grateful for every morning, they woke up side by side. In the summer of 1928, on a warm evening, very like the one when they had first met 50 years earlier, Dorothy and Vincent sat on their porch surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The house rang with laughter and conversation, the sound of family at peace. 50 years, Vincent said, shaking his head in wonder. Half a century since a rain-soaked young woman knocked on my door and changed my life. Best 50 years of my life, Dorothy said, squeezing his hand. Their eldest grandson, William Jr., who was studying to be a writer, said, "Tell us the story again, grandmother. How you met grandfather. I want to write it down, preserve it for future generations." And so, Dorothy told the story one more time, with Vincent adding details and corrections, the two of them painting a picture of that fateful night when lightning had struck and a cowboy had opened both his door and his heart to a desperate young woman in need. As she spoke, Dorothy looked around at all the faces listening so intently, at the family that had grown from that one act of kindness, and felt overwhelming gratitude. Her life had not turned out at all as she had planned when she left St. Louis all those years ago, but it had turned out infinitely better. She had been locked out in the rain, alone and frightened and uncertain, and Vincent Vale had opened his door, offering shelter and help without expectation of anything in return. From that simple act had grown a love story that spanned half a century, a family that would continue for generations, a legacy of kindness and hard work and devotion. The moral of the story, Dorothy said, finishing her tale, is that you never know when a simple act of kindness might change your entire life. If Vincent had turned me away that night, I do not know what would have become of me, but he opened his door, and in doing so, he gave me everything I never knew I needed. Vincent raised her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. You gave me everything too, my love, everything and more. As the evening wore on and the family gradually dispersed, heading home or to guest rooms, Dorothy and Vincent remained on the porch, watching the stars come out over the Texas prairie they both loved so much. No regrets? Vincent asked, as he had asked periodically over the years. Not a single one, Dorothy replied, as she always did. This life with you has been everything I could have dreamed and more. Every challenge, every joy, every ordinary moment, all of it has been precious because I shared it with you. Vincent pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, two people who had spent 50 years learning each other, loving each other, building a life together from nothing but determination and devotion. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and Dorothy woke in Vincent's arms as she had for 50 years. They rose slowly, taking their time as they did these days, and shared breakfast while planning their day. Vincent wanted to ride out to check on a new foal, and Dorothy had promised to help Helen prepare for the school's autumn term. It was an ordinary day, unremarkable in many ways, but Dorothy had learned long ago that ordinary days were actually the most precious. They were the fabric of a life, the steady accumulation of small moments that added up to something beautiful. As she watched Vincent saddle his horse, still moving with the confidence of a man who had spent his life working the land, Dorothy felt the same flutter in her heart she had felt when she first saw him standing in that cabin doorway. Some things, she thought with satisfaction, truly never changed. I love you, she called out, and Vincent turned to smile at her, his green eyes still bright despite the years. I love you more, he called back. Impossible, Dorothy said, laughing. Vincent rode out toward his land, and Dorothy went about her day, and the sun shone down on Trinity, Texas, where a simple act of kindness 50 years earlier had blossomed into a love that would last for generations. Years continued to pass in steady succession, marked by the milestones of a large and growing family. The Vale Ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, expanding into one of the largest operations in the region. William's veterinary practice thrived, serving not just Trinity, but neighboring towns. Helen's school had become renowned for its quality education, drawing families to settle in Trinity specifically so their children could attend, and Grace's artwork had made her moderately famous, though she always maintained that her greatest achievement was staying true to her roots. In 1935, Vincent fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. For a terrifying week, Dorothy sat by his bedside, holding his hand and refusing to leave, praying with an intensity she had not felt since her children were born. The doctors were pessimistic, given Vincent's age of 77, but Dorothy would not accept that their story might end this way. You opened your door for me, she whispered to him during one long night vigil. Now you have to open your eyes. We have more life to live together, Vincent Vale. Do not you dare leave me. Whether it was her will, his own stubbornness, or simply luck, Vincent recovered. It took months for him to regain his full strength, but by spring he was back on his feet, if moving a bit more slowly than before. You should know by now that I could never say no to you, he told Dorothy once he was well enough to joke. Even death itself is not going to separate us before we are good and ready. Dorothy held him close, grateful beyond words for more time. We still have grandchildren to watch grow up, and great-grandchildren to meet. You are not getting out of that duty. And indeed they did. By 1938, they had 23 grandchildren and 15 great-grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch house that Vincent had built nearly 60 years earlier had been expanded multiple times and still barely contained everyone during holiday gatherings. On their 60th wedding anniversary in 1938, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. 3 generations of Vales filled the house and spilled out onto the lawn, sharing food and stories and laughter. A professional photographer was hired to capture the day, and the images showed Vincent and Dorothy at the center of it all, surrounded by the family they had created. Vincent was 79 now, his face lined with age but his green eyes still sharp. Dorothy was 76, her hair completely white, her body frail but her spirit undimmed. They sat in chairs of honor while their family celebrated them, listening to speeches about their love story and their impact on the community. 60 years ago, Vincent said when asked to speak, his voice wavering slightly with age but still strong with emotion. A young woman knocked on my door in the middle of a rainstorm. She was soaking wet, desperate, and trying so hard to be brave. I almost did not answer, almost pretended I was not home because it was late and I was tired. But something made me open that door, and thank God I did. Because that young woman became my wife, the mother of my children, my partner in every sense of the word. Dorothy Vale, you were the best thing that ever happened to me, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. Dorothy was crying openly, as were most of the women and several of the men. When it was her turn to speak, she stood shakily, holding on to Vincent's hand for support. I was lost that night, she said, her voice soft but clear. Lost and alone and certain I had made a terrible mistake coming to Texas. I had given up everything for a job that disappeared, and I had nowhere to turn. But then a cowboy with kind green eyes opened his door, and he did not just give me shelter from the rain. He gave me hope. He gave me love. He gave me this beautiful life surrounded by all of you. Every day for 60 years, I have thanked God for that rainstorm and for Vincent's compassionate heart. He opened his door and his heart, and I walked in and found home. The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and storytelling. Dorothy and Vincent, too old now for much dancing, sat together and watched their family with profound contentment. This was their legacy, these people who carried their blood and their values into the future. As the evening wound down and people began leaving, saying their goodbyes with hugs and promises to visit soon, Dorothy and Vincent made their way slowly upstairs to their bedroom. It took longer than it used to, Vincent leaning heavily on his cane and Dorothy holding his arm for support, but they made it. They prepared for bed with the comfortable efficiency of 60 years of practice, helping each other with buttons and clasps, settling under the quilts that Dorothy had sewn decades earlier. Vincent pulled her close, and Dorothy rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat as she had done for 6 decades. Best 60 years of my life, Vincent murmured. Mine too, Dorothy agreed. Though I am looking forward to many more. As many as the good Lord gives us, Vincent said. Every day with you is a gift, Dorothy Vale. They fell asleep in each other's arms, content and complete, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. The next few years were peaceful, marked by the gentle rhythm of old age. Vincent and Dorothy spent their days reading, sitting on the porch, receiving visits from their ever-expanding family. They had long conversations about their lives, remembering people and events from decades past, marveling at how quickly time had passed. In the spring of 1942, Vincent died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83. Dorothy woke to find him still beside her, but gone, his face peaceful, his hand still holding hers. The grief was crushing, overwhelming, the loss of her partner of nearly 64 years, leaving a hole in her heart that could never be filled. The funeral was enormous, with people coming from all over Texas to pay their respects to a man who had been known for his integrity, generosity, and devotion to family. Dorothy sat in the front pew of the church, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, listening to story after story about Vincent's kindness and character. But the story that mattered most to her was their story, the one that had begun on a rainy night in 1878 when a desperate young woman had knocked on a cowboy's door and found not just shelter, but love. In the months that followed Vincent's death, Dorothy grieved deeply, but found comfort in her family and in her memories. She remained in the ranch house, surrounded by reminders of their life together, visited constantly by children and grandchildren who wanted to make sure she was not alone. One evening, nearly a year after Vincent's death, Dorothy sat on the porch watching the sunset as she and Vincent had done so many times. Her grandson Thomas Jr., now a young man of 20, sat beside her. "Tell me about grandfather," he said. "I know the facts, but I want to know what he was really like, what made him special." Dorothy smiled, her eyes distant with memory. "He was the best man I ever knew, kind without being soft, strong without being cruel, principled without being rigid. But what made him truly special was how he loved. He loved completely, without reservation, without condition. From the moment he opened his door to me until the day he died, he showed me every single day that I was cherished." "You were lucky to find each other," Thomas Jr. said. "Lucky," Dorothy agreed, "but also willing to work for it. Love is not just a feeling, you see. It is a choice you make every day to put the other person first, to forgive faults, to celebrate victories, to stand together against whatever life throws at you. Your grandfather and I chose each other every single day for 64 years, and I would do it all again." Dorothy lived another 3 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1945 at the age of 83, the same age Vincent had been. Her family found her in the morning, still in bed, a smile on her face as if she were dreaming of something wonderful. At her funeral, held in the same church where she and Vincent had been married 67 years earlier, their children spoke about their mother's dedication to education, her commitment to community, her unwavering love for their father and for all of them. But they also told the story of how their parents had met, the tale of a maid locked out in the rain and a cowboy who opened his door and his heart. It had become the family's founding myth, the story told to every new generation as an example of how one act of kindness could change the world. Dorothy was buried beside Vincent in the Trinity Cemetery under a simple headstone that read, "Dorothy Vale, beloved wife, mother, teacher, friend. She brought light wherever she went." The ranch house remained in the family, passing through generations of Vales who continued to live according to the principles Vincent and Dorothy had established: hard work, education, community service, and above all, kindness to those in need. The story of the maid locked out in the rain, and the cowboy who saved her became legend in Trinity and beyond, told and retold until it took on almost mythical proportions. But those who had known Vincent and Dorothy personally knew that the true magic was not in the dramatic beginning, but in the steady, faithful love they had maintained through 64 years of marriage, through joy and sorrow, prosperity and hardship, youth and age. They had built something beautiful together, something that lasted long after they were gone. Every time a Vale family member helped someone in need, opened their door to a stranger, chose kindness over convenience, they were honoring the legacy of that rainy night in 1878. The ranch continued to prosper, the school continued to educate, and the Vale family continued to grow, spreading across Texas and beyond, carrying with them the values instilled by a couple who had understood that love was the greatest gift one person could give another. And sometimes on rainy summer nights in Trinity, Texas, old-timers would sit on their porches and tell the story of Dorothy Emerson and Vincent Vale, the maid and the cowboy, whose love story had begun with a knock on a door and endured beyond death itself. It was a reminder that even in the harsh and unforgiving landscape of the Wild West, kindness could flourish, love could triumph, and one simple act of compassion could ripple forward through generations, creating a legacy that would never be forgotten. The house that Vincent built still stands on the Vale Ranch, lovingly maintained by descendants who understand its significance. Inside, on the wall of the main hallway, hangs a large portrait of Dorothy and Vincent taken on their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by photographs of their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and the generations that followed. Visitors to the house often remark on how you can feel the love that was built into its very foundations, how every room seems to whisper stories of family dinners and birthday celebrations, of children's laughter and grandparents' wisdom, of two people who created something lasting and beautiful from a chance meeting on a stormy night. The story of Dorothy and Vincent Vale serves as a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love. They were ordinary people who lived ordinary lives by the standards of their time, but they did so with such grace, such devotion, and such unwavering commitment to each other and their values that they became extraordinary. Their legacy lives on, not just in the descendants who bear their name, but in the countless lives they touch through their example. The students Dorothy taught, who went on to become teachers themselves, spreading education across the frontier. The people Vincent helped over the years, who paid that kindness forward. The community they strengthened simply by being faithful members of it. In the end, the story of the maid locked out in the rain, and the cowboy who opened his door, is not just a love story, though it certainly is that. It is a story about the best of what people can be, about choosing compassion over indifference, about building something meaningful and lasting, about loving faithfully through all of life's seasons. And it all began with a knock on a door, a threshold crossed, and two hearts that recognized in each other the possibility of home.